holding a tablet that was written thousands of years ago and being able to read what it says. It's an amazing feeling.
Imagine uncovering a 3,700-year-old Babylonian tablet, long overlooked in a museum drawer, and feeding it into cutting-edge AI, only to have it spit out mathematical and astronomical knowledge so advanced it rattles every assumption we've made about ancient intellect. What if this relic rewrites human history, showing that ancient minds operated on a level we thought didn't exist for millennia? Thanks to work from Tel Aviv University's AI translation tools, UNSW's deep dive into Plimpton 322, and those eerie eclipse-omen tablets, we're staring down truths that reshape our past. But how could a civilization crack math like this long before Pythagoras? The mathematical marvel of Plimpton 322. Picture a weathered clay tablet, Plimpton 322, chiseled into existence roughly 3,700 years ago in ancient Larsa, a thriving Sumerian city-state. It's small enough to fit in your hand, yet it carries a mathematical secret that would take modern scholars decades even to begin to understand. For centuries, it lay in silence, its wedge-shaped cuneiform marks frozen in time. Fast forward to the early 1900s. Edgar Banks, an American diplomat turned antiquities dealer and one of the real-life inspirations for Indiana Jones, acquired the tablet in Iraq. Eventually, it found its way into the rare books collection at Columbia University in New York, where it sat, largely ignored in a dusty display case. To most eyes, it was just another fragment of ancient mathematics. But in the 1940s, scholars noticed something odd. The numbers weren't random. They formed what looked suspiciously like Pythagorean triples, sets of numbers that perfectly fit the equation. And here's the strange part. Pythagoras wouldn't be born for another 1,000 years. It wasn't until researchers at the University of New South Wales, like Daniel Mansfield and Norman Wildberger, who pulled this relic into the spotlight, that its brilliance became clear. Plimpton 322 wasn't just a quirky list of right triangles, it was a trigonometric table. But not trigonometry as we know it. This was sexagesimal trigonometry, a base 60 system that's in some ways simpler and even more accurate than the trigonometry you learned in school. It's like your clock face, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. Base 60 can be divided evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, making for clean, exact fractions without messy decimals. In other words, it avoids the rounding errors that plague base 10 mathematics today. What the Babylonians had was a system built for precision. The tablet itself lists 15 rows of numbers, each representing a right triangle. These aren't little triangles either. Some of the triples involve huge integers, like 120 and 169. The first column appears to show the square of the ratio between the hypotenuse and the longer leg, descending row by row in a perfectly logical pattern. That's not random. It's the signature of a mind that understood how to organize data with purpose. Here's the part that still keeps me up at night. The Babylonians didn't stumble into this by accident. They had a method. They specifically chose regular numbers, ones divisible by small primes like 2, 3, and 5, ensuring the math stayed neat in base 60. This wasn't guesswork. It was algorithmic thinking. You could call it the earliest known example of mathematical programming, running in the minds of ancient scribes instead of on silicon chips. UNSW's analysis also suggests the tablet is incomplete. The original could have had 6 columns and up to 38 rows, which would make it a much larger and more systematic reference tool than we've seen. This isn't just a scrap of math, it's a carefully constructed resource. According to Dr. Wildberger, its accuracy even surpasses that of modern trigonometric tables, Because it's based on exact ratios instead of approximations. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like something out of a math lecture. But imagine your high school geometry teacher dropping this bomb on you. That theorem we credit to Pythagoras? Yeah, the Babylonians were using it 1,000 years earlier, and they might have done it better. That's the kind of historical mic drop we're talking about here. And it's not just about dates on a timeline. Plimpton 322 forces us to rethink the story we tell ourselves about the birth of science. For generations, we've been told the Greeks were the pioneers of mathematics, astronomy, and geometry. But this tablet suggests a much deeper, older origin. One rooted in Mesopotamia, where cities rose from the mudflats and ziggurats scraped the sky. This leads to the big question. What was it for? Some researchers think it might have been a teaching aid for scribal schools, training the next generation of mathematicians. Others suspect it was a practical tool for architects and engineers, helping them design temples, palaces, and canal systems with uncanny precision. Imagine ancient surveyors standing in the hot Mesopotamian sun, referencing this clay blueprint to ensure their work was perfectly aligned. The beauty of their trigonometry was its purity. The Babylonians didn't need sine, cosine, or tangent. They worked directly with ratios, stripping trigonometry down to its essentials. And because they used base 60, their calculations could achieve a level of accuracy that sometimes beats ours today. Think about that. The math you learned in school might actually be a downgrade from what existed almost 4,000 years ago. And now, AI has entered the picture. This isn't just a dusty artifact being re-examined by human scholars. Modern artificial intelligence can now translate cuneiform tablets at the push of a button, including languages that haven't been spoken for millennia. That means tablets like Plimpton 322 can be read in hours instead of decades. The AI doesn't just copy symbols. It understands their mathematical structure, revealing patterns and methods we didn't even know to look for. That's where the phrase 3,700 years old ancient Babylonian tablet, decoded by AI, what it showed is terrifying, comes alive. Because if AI can decode this, what else is sitting on museum shelves right now that could flip our understanding of history? What other modern ideas might turn out to be ancient rediscoveries? And just when you think you've got your head around that, there's a final twist. Plimpton 322 might just be the theory. But theory alone doesn't build ziggurats, irrigate farmland, or map the stars. The real question is, how did they use it? How did they turn this abstract, beautiful math into real-world applications that changed their world? The oldest applied geometry in action. So, here's the thing. Plimpton 322 was the theory, the ancient equivalent of a university lecture. But what happens when you drag that terrifyingly advanced math into the dusty, sun-bleached reality of 3,700 years ago? Well, that's where Psi 427 comes in. This is not an abstract list of perfect triangles. This is applied geometry, carved into clay for a very real, convenient reason: settling land disputes. Now, picture this. It's around 1900 BCE, somewhere in the ancient city of Sippar in Mesopotamia. You're not dealing with skyscrapers or GPS satellites. Your landmarks are mud brick walls, irrigation canals, and the occasional temple tower scraping the horizon. And yet, here you are, holding in your hand a clay tablet that could give a modern surveyor a run for their money. SE 427 is about the size of an iPad mini, but instead of glass and pixels, it's dense baked clay inscribed with neat rows of cuneiform. Daniel Mansfield, the Australian mathematician who decoded this tablet in 2019, realized that this wasn't just math for math's sake. This was a legal document. It laid out, in exact measurements, the boundaries of a farmer's field. And the numbers? They were pure Pythagorean triples, the same style of math we saw on Plimpton 322. And here's where it gets eerie. This tablet was made more than 1,000 years before Pythagoras was even born. That's not just rewriting the timeline, that's torching it. If Plimpton 322 is the dusty, ancient textbook, Psi 427 is the field manual. It's proof that the Babylonians weren't just experimenting with advanced trigonometry. They were using it to physically shape their world. Imagine two farmers in ancient Sippar arguing over where one plot ends and the other begins. Without precision, you get disputes, wasted resources, maybe even violence. But the Babylonian surveyors, the equivalent of your modern land registry agents, could whip out a clay tablet, press a stylus to wet clay, and lock in the dimensions so clearly that there was no room for argument. That's not just clever math. That's societal stability carved in stone or clay, in this case. And here's what makes this terrifying in the modern sense. The method recorded on Psi 427 is still taught today, more or less, in surveying and engineering. They were laying out perfect right angles in open fields without steel tape measures, KD software, or even paper. They did it with rope, pegs, and a deep understanding of ratios. Their unit system and base 60 math let them divide land with a precision that rivals some of our tools today. Now, AI is the silent hero in this rediscovery. The cuneiform on Psi 427 isn't just symbols, it's a record of distances, angles, and relationships between lines. Human experts used to take years to translate these symbols and cross-check the numbers carefully. But modern AI, trained on thousands of cuneiform samples, can now do it in a fraction of the time, spotting subtle patterns we'd miss. That's how Mansfield and his team could confirm that Psi 427's geometry wasn't a one-off fluke, but part of a much bigger Babylonian toolkit. And here's the kicker. Psi 427 links directly back to Plimpton 322. The surveyors who measured the Sippar field weren't just guessing where the corners went. They were likely using reference tables, possibly ones like Plimpton 322, to ensure every angle and side length was mathematically perfect. That means the Babylonians had a feedback loop between theory and practice. They created trigonometric data, used it in the field, and then recorded the results, building a body of applied geometry knowledge that would put some Renaissance scholars to shame. Think about how revolutionary that is. We often imagine early civilizations as brilliant, but limited. Capable of monumental architecture, yes, but mainly working through trial and error. Psi 427 tells a different story. It shows a culture that could define, record, and reproduce mathematical precision on demand. That's not just early math, that's an early form of engineering science, and this wasn't happening in isolation. The Babylonians were a trading, farming, and temple-building society. Every canal had to be dug at the right gradient to carry water without flooding. Every temple had to be perfectly aligned with the cardinal directions. Every plot of farmland had to be measured for taxation. The fact that we've now caught them using Pythagorean triples for such tasks means these tablets weren't just geek projects. They were infrastructure blueprints. Here's where I need you to pause and picture this. An ancient surveyor standing under the brutal Mesopotamian sun, adjusting rope lines. At the same time, an assistant presses symbols into a wet clay slab. That slab is then baked, not for decoration, but as an official, permanent record. Thousands of years later, it lands on a researcher's desk, still carrying the exact angles and distances of a long-vanished field. That's not just history, that's time travel in numerical form. And here's the late-night thought that messes with me. How much of what we think is modern is actually ancient knowledge that got lost, buried, and then rediscovered? If C427 had been dug up in the early 20th century and understood right away, would we still be crediting the Greeks as the first to use geometry this way? Or would our textbooks already reflect a world where Babylonian engineers were the real first masters? Remember, the AI-enhanced translation of these tablets isn't just showing us what numbers the Babylonians used. It's showing us how they thought. They weren't bound by the same mental frameworks we are today. They didn't bother with our trigonometric functions. They worked directly with ratios. They built systems around whole number relationships. That's a mindset that produces clean, error-free results without the approximations baked into our calculators. So when you hear the phrase 3,700-year-old ancient Babylonian tablet, decoded by AI, what it showed is terrifying. This is part of what it's talking about. It's terrifying not because it's ominous, but because it collapses the neat little ladder of human progress we've been taught. It makes you question whether history is a straight line or a cycle of remembering and forgetting. And if C427 and Plimpton 322 together can rewrite the history of math. Imagine what happens when we move from the ground to the sky because the Babylonians didn't stop at land surveying. They pointed their mathematical minds upward, tracking the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars with eerie accuracy. And they didn't just measure them for curiosity. They believed those movements could foretell disaster. This brings us to the next piece of the puzzle, the eclipse tablets. These records make C427 look almost tame because the Babylonians were not just marking boundaries on Earth. They mapped the heavens, predicted when the skies would darken, and warned of what it meant. The prophecies of doom. Here's a thought that'll keep you awake tonight. You're living in ancient Babylon. It's a warm night, and you're outside because the desert air finally feels bearable. The moon is bright, full, and hanging low over the horizon. Then, without warning, a shadow starts to creep across its surface. You've seen this before, but you know exactly what it means because your city's astronomers have warned you. An eclipse isn't just a shadow in the sky, it's a cosmic warning. And sometimes, it's the kind that makes kings lose sleep. We left off with the Babylonians using mind-bending geometry to divide farmland accurately. But that same civilization also turned its attention upward, tracking the skies with a precision that would take almost 4,000 years to rediscover the modern world. And what they recorded in clay. That's where the story starts to feel unsettling. Archaeologists have recently used AI to decode a set of ancient cuneiform tablets, some over 4,000 years old, that go far beyond star maps or lunar calendars. These were not just scientific records. These were omens. The tablets describe the timings and appearances of lunar eclipses in painstaking detail, cross-referencing them with historical events to predict disasters. And I don't mean vague fortune cookie predictions, I mean specifics. A king's death, a collapse of crops, a plague sweeping through the land, swarms of locusts blotting out the sky. The Babylonians believed the moon was deeply tied to the fate of their rulers. If the eclipse darkened a certain part of the moon, it could signal that the king's life was in danger. If it happened in a particular month or was accompanied by certain planetary alignments, it could mean famine, pestilence, or an invasion from the west. This was not just superstition to them, this was an early warning system. The stakes were so high that entire state rituals revolved around these predictions. Here's where it gets wild. When an eclipse was predicted to foretell the king's death, they sometimes staged a cosmic bait and switch. They would install a substitute king, often a prisoner or low-ranking official, who would rule in name only for 100 days. The real king would step back, hidden and safe, while the substitute took the bad omen on his head. At the end of the period, the substitute would be quietly executed, the curse lifted, and the real king restored. It's ruthless, but from their perspective, it was cosmic insurance. These predictions weren't lucky guesses. Babylonian astronomers recorded over 1,200 years of eclipse data, and they could identify patterns in the moon's movements that modern scientists now recognize as the Saros cycle, an 18-year repeating rhythm of eclipses. Without telescopes and without satellites, they could pinpoint not only the occurrence, but often the exact night it would happen. And here's the part that made researchers' jaws drop. The AI-assisted translation revealed references to eclipses that modern astronomers could confirm with NASA's eclipse database. The tablet's timings match what we now know actually happened in the skies thousands of years ago. That means these weren't myths written after the fact. They were real-time records, accurate enough to test against modern astronomy. The terrifying part of 3,700-year-old ancient Babylonian tablet, decoded by AI, what it showed is terrifying, isn't just that they predicted eclipses. It's that they tied those predictions to real events: droughts, wars, political assassinations, and the records show a disturbing number of matches. Imagine living in a world where the night sky was not just beautiful, but a ticking clock for doom. And AI has been a game-changer here. Translating cuneiform is notoriously slow, partly because many symbols can mean different things depending on context. But AI trained on massive cuneiform datasets can now flag those meanings based on probability, speeding up what used to take years into weeks. This allowed researchers to reconstruct entire omen sequences that had been broken or mistranslated before. And those sequences reveal a Babylonian worldview where astronomy, religion, and politics were woven into one unshakable system. Think about it. A civilization that could measure land with precision and also read the sky as if it were a royal decree. Their science and superstition were inseparable. The eclipse wasn't just an astronomical event. It was a verdict from the heavens, and the Babylonians acted accordingly, shifting policy, staging rituals, and even sacrificing lives to align themselves with that cosmic order. Here's something that stuck with me. The tablets often recorded not only the eclipse, but what happened afterward. In one case, a lunar eclipse was followed by an invasion from Elam. In another, the prediction of famine was backed up by archaeological evidence of drought in the same time period. Whether you believe in omens or not, the historical connections are eerie enough to make you wonder if their superstitions were, in some way, a coded form of long-term environmental and political observation. The more we uncover, the more this picture of Babylon shifts. We're used to thinking of them as an ancient empire that fell into the sands of history. But between their geometry tablets and these eclipse prophecies, they start to look like a society that had mastered a way of blending hard data with narrative power. And that's the part that resonates even now. They controlled the story. A king who understood the omen system could manipulate it, turning a shadow on the moon into a tool for reinforcing his authority. But here's the question I can't stop asking. How much of this kind of knowledge have we lost? If AI can resurrect a Babylonian eclipse forecast after 4,000 years, what else is still hidden in undeciphered scripts, buried under centuries of dust? And how much of what we think of as modern science is really just the rediscovery of ideas that were already mapped out in clay before the first iron sword was forged? because the same AI tools are used to decode psi. 427's land survey math and these eclipse omens have also been applied to other damaged tablets. And among them, researchers found something that wasn't geometry and wasn't an omen. It was music, a hymn, written in a notation system so ancient that it predates most of the instruments we know today. A song from the deep past, silent for millennia, is now playable again. From measuring the earth, reading the skies, and capturing the very sound of their world, the Babylonians left us more than warnings. They left us a cultural time capsule. And thanks to AI, we're starting to open it. The Lost Babylonian Hymn and AI's Archaeological Resurrection. Imagine this. You've just been taken through the chilling mathematics of Babylonian astronomy, the kind that could predict eclipses, and by extension, the supposed death of kings. You've seen how 3,700-year ancient Babylonian tablet decoded by AI, what it showed is terrifying, wasn't just a headline, it was a peek into a civilization that used the sky as a warning system. But now, we turn the page, and the same civilization that wrote those omens also left behind something far gentler. And it's not a list of laws, farming instructions, or a political decree. It's a song. A hymn, actually. A hymn to Babylon itself, the beating heart of their world, lost for over 2,000 years, and now brought back line by line thanks to artificial intelligence. The discovery comes from Professor Enrique Jimenez at LMU Munich, leading a project called the Electronic Babylonian Library. The name sounds like something you'd find in a cyberpunk novel, but the mission is very real. Digitize, catalog, and ultimately piece back together the fragmented voices of Mesopotamia. Because here's the problem. Most Babylonian literature doesn't survive in neat, complete form. What we have are shards. Sometimes just a few words, scratched into broken clay, sitting in museum drawers. Before, a scholar might spend an entire career comparing a handful of fragments, trying to guess whether they belonged to the same work. Now, AI trained to recognize cuneiform signs and linguistic patterns can scan tens of thousands of fragments and spot those connections in seconds. It's like giving archaeologists a supercharged photographic memory. And that's how they found it. A scattered 250-line hymn praising Babylon, written during the city's golden age, tucked away in tiny separated pieces across different collections. The AI stitched those pieces back together like a puzzle no human could have solved alone. What's striking is the tone. The hymn isn't about conquest or judgment, it's about pride, beauty, and devotion to the city. It praises Babylon's architecture, its gardens, its markets, and even its people, with particular attention to women. Not in the way ancient history often reduces them to wives or mothers, but as active participants in civic life, mentioned in the same breath as temples and rivers, as part of what makes the city flourish. This is important. When we think of Babylon, the images we get are usually of the Hanging Gardens or the Tower of Babel myth, massive, impersonal structures. But this hymn reveals a society that also valued its own citizens as part of the city's greatness. Women's presence in religious festivals and market life wasn't just background detail, it was celebrated in song. If the omen tablets from Chapter 3 felt like the city looking up to the skies in fear, this feels like Babylon looking inward in love. It's almost impossible to imagine the same scribes who recorded a coming eclipse as a death sentence, also carefully inscribing lines about the joy of living among the canals, the sound of music in temple courtyards, and the beauty of the Ishtar Gate. Yet, they did. And that's the power of what AI has unlocked here. It forces us to see ancient Babylon not as one-dimensional, but as complex, contradictory, and deeply human. Think about what it means to resurrect a song after over 2 millennia of silence. We are so used to seeing ancient cultures through their monuments and their wars, but this is something else entirely. This is their art, their inner voice. And AI is making it possible because it can match fragments scattered across museums in London, Berlin, Istanbul, and Baghdad, where human scholars might never have the time or ability to compare them. Jimenez described it almost like giving Babylon its library back. And it's not just the hymn. The electronic Babylonian library has reconstructed thousands of lines of text that were previously incomplete or unreadable: poems, myths, legal codes, and medical recipes. But the hymn stands out because it's so personal. It's not telling us how they measured land or warned of plagues. It's telling us how they wanted to be remembered. And here's the part that gets me. In the hymn, Babylon is praised not only for what it is, but for what it symbolizes. A place where gods and humans coexist, where order is maintained, where life has rhythm and meaning. You can almost hear it as a festival chant, echoing off the walls of temples, drifting down streets lined with vendors selling dates and barley bread. This was a society that understood spectacle and ceremony, and the hymn was part of that civic theater. So now we have this almost cinematic contrast. On one side, the mathematics and astronomy that could send a substitute king to his death to ward off a prophecy. On the other hand, a poetic celebration of the city that those same officials fought to protect. AI didn't just give us the cold data. It gave us the emotional texture. The Babylonians weren't just watching the skies for omens. They also lived, loved, sang, and built an identity around their city. And that's the reflection point for me. This technology isn't only resurrecting the science of the past, it's resurrecting the soul of the past. We can reconstruct the facts of their calendars and their property surveys, but it's their songs that tell us what those facts meant to them. It's the difference between knowing someone's bank transactions and reading their love letters. What's wild is that this is just one hymn. Imagine the thousands of works still lying in storage, waiting for AI to piece them back together. My guess? We'll see more of these moments where history pivots from being a list of events to a window into human feeling. And that changes how we think about ancient intelligence, not just in terms of their ability to build, measure, and predict, but in their capacity to express meaning. Because ultimately, history is not just about what happened. It's about how people experienced it. And if AI can keep pulling these voices out of the clay, we might start to see the ancient world in a way no history book has ever shown us. The terrifying truth of recursive civilization. What if history isn't a straight climb from ignorance to enlightenment? What if it's a loop, a recursive civilization, where humanity climbs, stumbles, loses its grip, and then climbs again? That's the thought that lingers after the 3,700-year-old ancient Babylonian tablet decoded by AI. What it showed was terrifying, not just because of the maths, the astronomy, or even the hymn, but because it proves something deeper. Civilizations have independently reached staggering heights of knowledge before, only for most of it to vanish. And here we are, in our 21st century comfort, assuming we're at the top of the intellectual food chain. But what if someone digs us up in 3,000 years and finds fragments of our own tablets? What will they think about our algorithms, our medical research, our climate data? Will they see it as genius? Or will it look terrifying, a warning of how much we knew and still failed to act on? This is mathematical time travel, Every fragment AI reconstructs is like a message from the past saying, "We've been here before." And maybe the question isn't just how advanced they were, but whether we've learned enough to break the cycle. So, what do you think? Are we truly progressing or just walking in circles? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because if the Babylonians could see our world today, I wonder if they'd feel awe or déjà vu.